day everyone. So for today, I'm going to talk about the postpartum hemorrhage. So what is postpartum hemorrhage? Hemorrhage, one of the most important causes of maternal mortality associated with childbearing and possess a possible threat throughout pregnancy and is also a major potential danger in the immediate period. So significantly that occurs in 5% to 8% of women postnatally. And traditionally, postpartum hemorrhage has been defined as any blood loss from the uterus greater than 500 ml within a 24-hour period. So in specific agencies, the loss may not be considered hemorrhage until it reaches 1,000 ml. So hemorrhage may occur either early within the first 24 hours or late anytime after the first 24 hours during the remaining days of the 6 weeks per period. So the greatest danger of hemorrhage is in the first 24 hours because of the grossly denuded and unprotected uterine area left after detachment of the placenta. So what is the etiology or the causative factors of postpartum hemorrhage? So first is the uterine atony, then the lacerations, the retained placental fragments, the uterine inversion, and the disseminated intravascular coagulation. So the signs and symptoms of postpartum hemorrhage is first, blood loss greater than the typical 500 ml per vaginal birth or 1,000 ml cesarean delivery. Blood loss may appear as a continuous or sudden heavy flow of blood. Rapid heart rate and low blood pressure are signs of hypovolemic shock due to blood loss. And then hypovolemic shock and anemia may result in a pale complexion and cold, moist skin. Symptoms of shock from significant blood loss leading to decreased perfusion to the brain and decreased urine output or no urine output due to renal hypoperfusion, a sign of severe shock, and pain in the abdomen, which can indicate retained placenta, uterine atony, or uterine rupture. And the diagnostics of postpartum hemorrhage are to inspect the perineum and vaginal area for lacerations, hematomas, or uterine inversion. Then CBC, complete blood count, PT and or fibrinogen levels to assess clotting function, especially if DIC is suspected, then ultrasound. So what are the medical interventions? So first is manual uterine massage is the first step to stimulate uterine contraction and control bleeding caused by uterine atony. Then administer oxytocin, which is the first line medication for uterine atony to stimulate contractions and reduce bleeding. Then fluid resuscitation, blood transfusion, antibiotics, and oxygen therapy. So what are the surgical interventions? So these include manual removal of the placenta, curettage, big Lynch circular, hysterectomy. For certain cases of postpartum hemorrhage, a procedure to block bleeding arteries can be performed, often in cases where uterine conversion is desired. So what are the considerations of postpartum hemorrhage? This includes closely monitoring of blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate, and oxygen saturation. Watch for signs of hypovolemic shock. Accurately measure and document the amount of vaginal bleeding. Monitor for signs of excessive bleeding after uterine massage. Provide medications. Provide emotional support. Encourage rest and educate the patient about postpartum care. Now let's move on to the uterine atony, which is part of the postpartum hemorrhage. So what is uterine atony? So uterine atony is the inability of the uterus to contract effectively after delivery, leading to a failure in controlling postpartum hemorrhage. It is the most common cause of postpartum hemorrhage. So the etiology or causative factors of uterine atony. So there are several factors which includes over-distension of the uterus, such as large baby, multiple gestation, polyhydramnios, or excessive amniotic fluid. So next is prolonged labor or overuse of oxytocin, trauma during delivery, retained placenta, uterine infections, and uterine involution problems. So what are the signs and symptoms of uterine atony? This includes excessive bleeding, soft buggy uterus, increased heart rate, hypotension, pale or cool skin, and failure to experience after bleeds. Then what are the diagnostics? It includes physical exam, ultrasound, CBC, vital signs monitoring. And the medical interventions for uterine atony is bimanual massage, prostaglandin administration, blood transfusion, IV fluids monitoring. Then what are the surgical interventions? This include manual removal of placenta, Billings suture, and hysterectomy. So what are the nursing considerations? So you must offer a bedpan or assist the woman in ambulating to the bathroom at least every 4 hours to be certain her bladder is empty. A full bladder pushes an uncontracted uterus into an even more contracted state to reduce bladder pressure. Insertion of a urinary catheter may be ordered. Next is lacerations. So what is laceration? So small lacerations or tears of the birth canal are common and may be considered a normal consequence of childbearing. Large lacerations, however, can cause complications. So what is the etiology or the causative factors of lacerations? So they occur most often with difficult or precipitate births, in primigravidas, with the birth of a large infant, greater than 9 pounds, with the use of lithotomy position and instruments. So what are the signs and symptoms? So immediate or ongoing vaginal post-delivery, which may be noticed on pads or during a vaginal examination. Pain at the site of the tear, particularly when sitting, walking, or during urination or bowel movements. Swelling and bruising around the site of the tear, especially in the perineum. If the tear involves the urethra or bladder, it may cause difficulty or pain while urinating. Visible tear in the vaginal, perineal, or cervical area that may be seen upon examination. So what are the diagnostics of lacerations? These include inspection and palpation of the perineum, vaginal and rectal exam, ultrasound, hemoglobin and hematocrit, endocervical cultures. And then what are the medical interventions? This includes the use of local anesthetics, medications like ibuprofen or acetaminophen. Ice applied in the perineum can reduce swelling and numb pain. Monitor for excessive bleeding or signs of infection following laceration repair. And administer if there is concern about contamination or if the tear involves non-serous surfaces. So what are the surgical interventions? These include repair of lacerations, cervical laceration repair. And then what are the nursing considerations? So thoroughly assess for the presence of lacerations following delivery, including infecting the perineum, vaginal walls, and cervix. Regularly assess the pain level, especially in the perineal and vaginal areas, and provide appropriate pain relief. So monitor blood loss and the signs of excessive bleeding, especially in the cases of more significant lacerations, and watch for signs of infections such as redness, swelling, or pus at the site of the tear. So let's move on to the cervical laceration. So what is cervical laceration? So lacerations of the cervix are usually found in the sides of the cervix. So near the branches of the uterine artery. So if the artery is torn, the blood loss may be so great that blood gushes from the vaginal opening. Because this is the arterial bleeding, it is brighter red than the venous blood lost with uterine atony. Fortunately, this bleeding ordinarily occurs immediately after delivering the placenta. So when the physician or nurse midwife is still in attendance. So what is the etiology or causative factors of cervical laceration? So this includes trauma during labor, large baby, abnormal position of the baby, cervical incompetence or scarring, use of forceps or vacuum, multiple pregnancies or previous vaginal deliveries, episiotomy, and or perineal laceration. So what are the signs and symptoms? This includes excessive vaginal bleeding, bright red blood, pain and discomfort, inability to stop breathing, and shock symptoms. Next is the diagnostics of cervical laceration. Um, so through ultrasound, blood test, and postpartum monitoring. So what are the medical intervention for this? So the use of oxytocin to help with urine contractions and reduce excessive bleeding, IV fluids, and if the bleeding is severe and leads to significant blood loss, a blood transfusion may be required. Is the surgical interventions of cervical lacerations, which include suturing of lacerations, hysterectomy, nursing considerations, continuously monitor for signs of hypovolemic shock, ensure the uterus is firm, and assess the amount of vaginal bleeding. Look for any tears or clots that may be contributing to bleeding. So next would be the vaginal lacerations, which is the last type of laceration here. So, what is vaginal laceration? So, vaginal lacerations are tears or cuts in the vaginal tissue that occur during childbirth, typically during the delivery of the baby or placenta. So, these lacerations can vary in severity from minor surface tears to deep tears that may involve surrounding tissues. So, they are common cause of postpartum bleeding. So, what is the etiology or the causative factors of vaginal laceration? So fast or forceful deliveries can result in tearing the vaginal walls. Baby with large head or body. The use of forceps or vacuum extractors to assist in delivery can increase the risk of vaginal lacerations. The signs and symptoms of vaginal laceration, which includes vaginal bleeding, pain and discomfort, visible tears or laceration, and in severe cases, the vaginal wall may bulge or protrude from the vaginal opening. So the diagnostics, a thorough vaginal and perineal exam is essential, visual inspection, pelvic ultrasound, and is medical intervention. So administered to help the uterus contract and control bleeding. Then local anesthetics, fluid resuscitation, and if bleeding is excessive, a blood transfusion may be required to restore blood volume. So what are the surgical interventions? First is suturing of lacerations, repair of episiotomy, and hysterectomy. So what are the nursing considerations? So monitor vaginal bleeding carefully, track vital signs such as blood pressure, heart rate, and temperature to detect signs of shock or infection. Provide pain relief such as analgesics, ice packs as the area may be tender. Next is the perineal laceration. So lacerations of the perineum usually occur when a woman is placed in the lithotomy position for birth because this position increases tension on the perineum. Perineal lacerations are classified into 4 categories depending on the extent and depth of the tissue involved. So what is the etiology and the causative factors? A fast and or forceful delivery increases the likelihood of perineal tearing. A large baby, the use of forceps or vacuum extraction can contribute to perineal trauma and lacerations, prolonged second stage of labor, and primiparity. So what are the signs and symptoms? Bleeding, pain in the perineal area, a visible tear incision in the perineum, swelling and bruising, pain during urination or bowel movements, redness, warmth, or discharge from the tear site that may indicate infection. So what are the diagnostics? A thorough perineal and vaginal examination is essential immediately after delivery to assess for tears or lacerations. So what are the medical interventions? Local anesthesia for immediate pain relief during suturing. Antibiotics may be prescribed to prevent infection. Then ice packs. The next is a surgical intervention, which includes suturing the laceration, episiotomy repair, and severe lacerations may require the repair of the anal sphincter and rectal mucosa. So what are the nursing considerations? This includes to assess the amount of bleeding, to monitor vital signs, and to monitor the perineum for signs. So next would be the retained placental fragment. So what is retained placental fragments? So it refers to portions of the placenta that remain in the uterus after childbirth, preventing the uterus from fully contracting and leading to complications such as excessive bleeding, infection, and delayed postpartum recovery. So what are the etiology and causative factors? These include incomplete separation of the placenta, forceful or improper manual removal, placenta previa, and in multiple pregnancies, or a long complicated labor may interfere with the normal expulsion of the placenta. Then what are the signs and symptoms? First is the excessive vaginal bleeding, foul-smelling vaginal discharge, abdominal pain or tenderness, and delayed uterine involution. So what are the diagnostics? A thorough physical exam, transabdominal or transvaginal ultrasound, HCG levels, endometrial biopsy, and CBC and blood cultures. So what are the medical interventions? These include administering oxytocin to stimulate uterine contractions. Broad-spectrum antibiotics may be given to prevent or treat infection. Analgesics, then, in cases of significant bleeding, intravenous fluids and blood transfusions may be required to stabilize the patient. What are the surgical interventions? Manual removal of the placenta, a dilation of curettage procedure, and then what are the nursing considerations? This includes to track the amount, color, and consistency of the vaginal bleeding, to detect signs of hemorrhage, and to close monitoring of blood pressure, then palpate the uterus to assess for uterine tone and involution. Next would be the uterine inversion. So uterine inversion is a rare but life-threatening obstetric complication where the uterus turns inside out after childbirth. So what is the etiology and causative factors? Excessive pulling of the umbilical cord, fundal pressure, prolonged or rapid delivery, abnormal placental adherence, and a placenta located at the focus. So what are the signs and symptoms? Severe vaginal bleeding, sudden intense abdominal pain and signs of shock, and a visible or palpable mass outside the vaginal opening. So what are the diagnostics? A pelvic exam or vaginal examination is usually sufficient, and ultrasound. What are the medical interventions? So resuscitation and stabilization, then administering oxytocin to help promote uterine contractions, and then strong pain medications. What are the surgical interventions? So first is manual reduction of the inverted uterus, hysterectomy, and repair of uterine damage. What are the nursing considerations? Monitor blood pressure, monitor vaginal bleeding, provide pain relief, ensure proper sterile techniques. The next is the disseminated intravascular coagulation. So what is this? So DIC is a deficiency in clotting ability caused by vascular injury. It may occur in any woman in the postpartum period, but it is usually associated with the premature separation of the placenta. So what is the etiology or causative factors? First is placental abruption, severe preeclampsia or eclampsia, amniotic fluid embolism, retained placental or uterine rupture, and tissue injury and trauma can lead to the release of procoagulant substances. What are the signs and symptoms? Decreased platelet count and clotting factor, mucosal bleeding, or signs of internal bleeding due to consumption of clotting factors, skin bruising, jaundice, and elevated liver enzymes. So what are the diagnostics? CBC, elevated D-dimer levels indicates increased fibrin degradation. Then fibrin degradation products, D-dimer test, peripheral blood smear, and urinalysis. What are the medical interventions? Address the trigger or underlying condition. Low-dose heparin may be considered in certain cases of DIC. And to support circulation and blood pressure and correct any electrolyte imbalances, administer oxygen if there is any respiratory distress or hypoxia. And in cases of renal failure, dialysis may be necessary to manage kidney dysfunction. So what are the surgical interventions? First is surgical removal of the underlying cause and amputation in rare cases. What are the nursing considerations? This includes regularly monitor blood pressure, carefully monitor for signs of bleeding, monitor urine output and renal function, ensure proper administration of blood products. Next is the sub-involution of the uterus. So what is sub-involution of the uterus? It is the complete return of the uterus to its pre-pregnant size and shape. At a 4 or 6 week postpartum visit, the uterus is still enlarged and soft with sub-involution local discharge usually is still present. So what are the etiology or the causative factors? This includes retained placental fragments, infections, over-distended uterus, retained blood clots, uterine fibroids, prolonged or difficult labor, conditions like diabetes, obesity, or hypertension. So what are the signs and symptoms? So this includes persistent or recurrent postpartum bleeding, foul-smelling lochia, or on physical examination, the uterus may be larger than expected at the postpartum stage. Persistent abdominal discomfort or pain, general feelings of fatigue or weakness due to ongoing loss. So, what are the diagnoses? Physical examination, trans-abdominal or transvaginal ultrasound, complete CBC, complete blood count, retained tissue or infection is suspected. Then, what are the medical interventions? The Deuteritonics, blood transfusion, IV fluids are administered to replace lost fluids. And the surgical interventions is if there are any retained placental fragments or tissue within the uterus, ENC may be necessary to clear the uterus and facilitate proper involution. Then surgical repair if indicated and hysterectomy in severe cases. What are the nursing considerations? This includes to assess blood loss, to monitor for tachycardia, hypotension, and other signs of hypovolemic shock, regular assess the uterus to check for tone, size, and position, provide appropriate pain relief, and promote hydration. Then, lastly is the perineal hematomas. So, it is a collection of blood in the subcutaneous layer of tissue of the perineum. So the overlying skin, as a rule, is intact with no noticeable trauma such as blood collections can be caused by injury to blood vessels in the perineum during birth. They're most likely to occur after rapid spontaneous births and in women who have perineal varicosities. So what are the etiology or the causative factors? This includes perineal trauma, both prolonged and rapid labor, large infant nulliparity or first-time birth, use of forceful traction, coagulation disorders, and abdominal blood vessel. What are the signs and symptoms? Pain and tenderness, a visible or palpable swelling, or both. Bluish or purplish discoloration, pressure from the hematoma. Then, a large firm mass may be palpable. The diagnostics, so physical examination, pelvic ultrasound. In severe or complicated cases, a CT or MRI may be used to assess the extent of the hematoma and the blood test. Then medical interventions, pain management, applying ice to the affected area, then small hematomas may resolve on their own and observation is sufficient for the patient if infection is suspected. Then surgical interventions. So for larger hematomas or those that can cause significant pain or pressure, a surgical incision may be required to drain the accumulated blood, hemostasis, repair of lacerations or episiotomy. And then what are the nursing considerations? This includes regularly assess the perineal area for signs of hematoma, assess the level of pain and provide pain relief as necessary, continuously monitor for signs of excessive bleeding or ongoing blood loss, educate the patient on proper positioning, and watch for any signs of complications such as infection, rebleeding, or the development of infection. So that would be all for me.
So good day everyone. So today we'll be discuss about the puerperal infection. So a puerperal infection, or also known as postpartum infection, is an infection of the uterus and surrounding tissues. So this usually happens after the trauma of vaginal birth or cesarean delivery. So how are puerperal infection caused? So an intact uterus is considered sterile. However, bacteria that live on the skin, such as streptococcus or staphylococcus and other bacteria, can still cause infection by invading damaged skin or tissue. So these bacteria thrive in the moist and warm environment of the lower abdomen. So postpartum infection can start in the uterus after the mother's water breaks. So additionally, the uterus can become infected if the amniotic sac and its fluid become infected. So the amniotic sac is the membrane that contains the fetus and fluids. So what are the risk factors of puerperal infection? So your risk of developing an infection after you deliver differs depending on the method used to deliver your baby. Your chance of contracting an infection is 1 to 3% of standard vaginal deliveries, 5 to 15% of scheduled cesarean deliveries performed before labor begins, and then 15 to 20% of non-scheduled cesarean deliveries performed after labor begins. And added risk may include females with no previous pregnancy and extreme in age, such as very young or older. Furthermore, prior medical conditions such as obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, anemia, and immune system problems may add to the chance of infection. So, conditions that increase a woman's risk for postpartum infection. First is rupture of the membrane more than 24 hours before birth, or the bacteria may have started to invade the uterus while the fetus was still in the uterus. Then, placental fragments retained within the uterus, or the tissue necrosis and serves as an excellent bed for bacterial growth. Then, postpartum hemorrhage, or the woman's general condition is weakened. Then, pre-existing anemia, then prolonged and difficult labor, particularly instrument births. Then internal fetal heart monitoring. Then local vaginal infection was present at the time of birth. Then the uterus was explored after birth for a retained placenta or abnormal bleeding site. So what are the type of puerperal infection? We have endometritis, infection of the perineum, peritonitis, thrombophlebitis, or we have three kinds of thrombophlebitis. We have the femoral, pelvic, and pulmonary embolus, and then mastitis. So first, we will discuss about the endometritis. So what is endometritis? It is an infection of the endometrium. So it is the lining of the uterus. Bacteria gain access to the uterus through the vagina and enter the uterus either at the time of birth or during the postpartum period. So this may occur with any birth, but the infection is usually associated with chorioamnionitis and cesarean birth. So what are the etiology and causative factors? So endometritis is a polymicrobial disease involving an average of 2 to 3 organisms. So in most cases, it arises from an ascending infection from organisms found in the abnormal indigenous flora. So commonly isolated organisms include Uroaplasma uroliticum, Peptostreptococcus, Garnierella vaginalis, Bacteroides vives, and Group B streptococcus. So, and then we have herpes and tuberculosis are rare causes, although in some countries tuberculosis is not an uncommon etiologic agent for endometritis. So what are the signs and symptoms for this? We have fever, pelvic pain, vaginal bleeding or discharge, constipation or pain with bowel movements, swelling in your abdomen, and general unwell feeling. So we have the diagnostics. We have culture from cervix from chlamydia, gonorrhea, and other organisms. Then we have also uh, endometrial biopsy, ESR, laparoscopy, WBC, looking at vaginal fluid under microscope. And then we have the medical intervention. We have antibiotic therapy, pain management, hospitalization, and monitoring. For surgical intervention, we have dilatation and curettage, hysteroscopy, and then hysterectomy. For nursing consideration, we have vital signs monitoring, pain assessment, administer antibiotics, monitor vaginal discharge, prevent sepsis, promote rest and comfort, hydration and nutrition, and follow-up care. For the next type of puerperal infection, we have infection of the perineum. So if a woman has a suture line on her perineum from an episiotomy or laceration repair, a portal of an entry exists for bacterial invasion. So what are the etiology or causative factors? We have microorganism like the bacterial, fungal, and viral. We have the poor hygiene and environmental factors. We have sexual activity, underlying medical conditions like diabetes, obesity, injury or trauma, hormonal changes, chronic medical conditions, and use of irritants. So what are the signs and symptoms? We have swelling and pain near the perineum, redness and inflammation around the affected area, an infected cyst or abscess that may look like a lump or an open wound, unusual discharge or bleeding from the lump, genitals, or anus, itching, bruising, or new growth on the perineum, and pain with urinating or defecating. So what are the diagnostics? We have gram staining, potassium hydroxide preparation, microscopy for herpes simplex virus, polymerase chain reaction, urine and blood test, pump, pap smear, ultrasound, CT or MRI scan, STI screening. So what are the medical intervention? We have giving antibiotics, and fungal infections, viral infections, sexual transmitted infection, then abscess of cellulitis, and then the general supportive care. Then with our surgical intervention, we have the incision and drainage, excision of perineal abscess of fistula, surgical drainage for pelvic abscess, surgical treatment of genital warts or the HPV related, skin grafting or reconstruction, vaginal or perineal repair, and then we have the nursing consideration. First, we need to assess and monitor the patient, hygiene and wound care, pain management, medication adherence, infection control, nutrition support, psychosocial support, and postpartum surgical care, and follow-up and referrals. Then we have peritonitis. Peritonitis or infection of the peritoneal cavity usually occurs as an extension of endometritis. So it is one of the gravest complications of childbearing and is major cause of death from puerperal infection. So the infection spreads through the lymphatic system or directly through the fallopian tubes or uterine wall to the peritoneal cavity. An abscess may form in the cul-de-sac of Douglas because this is the lowest point of the peritoneal cavity and gravity causes infected material to localize there. What are the etiology and causative factors? So depending on its cause, peritonitis can be classified into two main types of peritonitis. We have spontaneous bacterial peritonitis and secondary peritonitis. So spontaneous bacterial peritonitis is usually a complication of a liver or kidney failure, resulting in fluid buildup in the abdominal cavity, or also known as ascites. We have also the secondary peritonitis. On the other hand, has a clear source. So it is typically the result of ruptured organ in the abdomen, which can allow bacteria um, to enter the peritoneal cavity. Secondary peritonitis most often occurs as a complication of gastrointestinal disorders such as appendicitis, pancreatitis, and a ruptured stomach ulcer or perforated colon. So what are the signs and symptoms? We have rigid abdomen, abdominal pain, high fever, rapid pulse, vomiting, and the appearance of being acutely ill. So what are the diagnostics? So we have blood test, imaging test, peritoneal fluid analysis. For medical intervention, hospitalization and monitoring, then pharmacologic therapy like IV broad spectrum antibiotics, pain management with analgesics, vasopressors of septic shocks develops. So for surgical intervention, we have exploratory laparotomy or laparoscopy to remove infection source, peritoneal lavage or flushing the abdominal cavity, bowel resection in the necrotic tissue is present, and the abscess drainage if needed. So what are the um, nursing consideration? First, assess the patient with monitor the vital signs, then administer IV if prescribed, then prevent complication by monitoring for shock, sepsis, or organ failure, then explain the importance of completing antibiotics, educate on early signs of complication, and encourage gradual resumption of diet post-recovery. Next will be the thrombophlebitis. So, phlebitis is inflammation of the lining of a blood vessel. So, thrombophlebitis is an inflammation with the formation of blood clots. When thrombophlebitis occurs in the postpartum period, it is usually an extension of an endometrial infection. It tends to occur because a woman's fibrinogen level is still elevated from pregnancy, leading to increased blood clotting. Dilatation of lower extremity veins is still present as a result of the pressure of the fetal head during the pregnancy and birth. The relative inactivity of the period or um, or the or a prolonged time spent in a delivery or birthing room stirrups leads to rolling stasis and blood clotting in the lower extremities. Thrombophlebitis, thrombophlebitis is classified as superficial vein disease or SVD or deep vein thrombosis or DVT. So what are the etiology and causative factors? We have the genetic or inherited condition, varicose veins, trauma, medical procedures and medications, IV drug use, lack of movement, conditions or circumstances that otherwise affect clotting, and being pregnant on recently giving birth. So what are the signs and symptoms? We have swelling, veins changing that you can feel, then pain or soreness. For the diagnostics, we have physical exam, imaging test, and blood test. For medical intervention, we have pain medication, blood thinners, thrombolytic drugs, and then antibiotics. For surgical intervention, we have mechanical thrombectomy, vein removal, vein stripping, catheter-based procedures, and then bypass, then sclerotherapy. For nursing consideration, we need to monitor for redness, warmth, swelling, and pain along the affected vein. Check for the signs of deep vein thrombosis, abscess for fever and infection. Evaluate the patient's history for risk factors. Apply warm compress to reduce pain and inflammation. Elevate the affected limb. And then use compression stockings if prescribed and administer anticoagulants and anti-inflammatory medication as ordered. Then remove IV if thrombophlebitis is IV related and discard in a different site. Encourage ambulation and leg exercise. Encourage adequate hydration. Educate the patient on risk factors, medication adherence, and signs of complication. Encourage mobility and exercise. Rotate IV sites regularly and use proper catheter insertion techniques. And then promote adequate hydration and healthy lifestyle habits. Next, we have mastitis for the last type of verbal infection. So mastitis, or the infection of the breast, may occur as early as the 7th postpartum day or not until the baby is weeks or months old. So the etiology and causative factors, we have the most common cause of mastitis is hyperlactation or an oversupply of milk. So this oversupply of milk causes your milk ducts to narrow because the surrounding tissue puts pressure on the ducts. So this leads to engorgement, which is when your breasts are extremely full and swollen. So this is known as inflammatory mastitis. So inflammatory mastitis can lead to bacterial mastitis. Bacterial mastitis is when infection occurs due to inflammatory mastitis. So what are the signs and symptoms? We have swollen breast, breast tender or warm to touch, breast engorged, breast pain, hard lumps on your breast, red marks on your breast, and fever and chills. So for diagnostic, we have physical exam, breast ultrasound or mammogram. And then for the medical intervention, we have antibiotics, pain and inflammation management, and breast emptying and supportive care. For surgical intervention, we have needle aspiration or ultrasound guided, incision and drainage, surgical debridement, duct excision, and mastectomy. So for nursing consideration, we have to promote resolution of the infectious process, provide client and family teaching that explain how to prevent infection, encourage the mother to do the following, breastfeed frequently, Then recognize the signs and symptoms of the infection. So that's all for the puerperal infection.
Good day, everyone. Case study for emotional and psychological complication of the puerperal. So, first, postpartum depression. So, postpartum depression is a mood disorder that affects the mother usually within the first week 2 months after birth. It is characterized by persistent feeling of sadness, hopelessness, and anxiety, interfering with the mother's ability to take care for herself and her baby. So, the etiology or the associated factors. So, first, hormonal changes in the postpartum period involve a rapid drop in estrogen and progesterone, while the oxytocin and the prolactin increase to support breastfeeding and bonding, leading to emotional and psychological adjustment. Then history of mental illness influenced by the hormonal fluctuation, genetic predisposition, psychological stress, or sleep deprivation can trigger or worsen the pre-existing psychiatric disorder. Lack of social support and isolation or inadequate support from family and friends can worsen emotional distress. Sleep deprivation and exhaustion, the demands of caring for a newborn can lead to extreme fatigue, worsening the mood disturbances. Difficult childbirth experience like traumatic labor, emergency cesarean section, or complication can increase emotional distress. And stress and financial concerns like anxiety about parenting responsibilities, work-life balance, or the financial instability can contribute. And lastly, the hormonal disorders like thyroid dysfunction or anemia can mimic or worsen the depression symptoms. Signs and symptoms. Persistent sadness, excessive crying, and feeling of hopelessness. Loss of interest in activities once enjoyed, difficulty bonding with the baby, or feeling indifferent toward the newborn. Changes in sleep patterns, or insomnia or excessive sleep. Fatigue and lack of energy, feeling guilt, worthlessness, or failure as a mother. Irritability, mood swings, and anxiety. Difficulty of concentrating or making decisions, and appetite changes, or loss of appetite or overeating. Diagnostics. Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale, Psychiatric Evaluation, Hormonal Test, and CBC. For medical intervention, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, cognitive behavioral therapy, support groups and counseling to provide emotional support and reassurance, hormone therapy in some cases if hormonal imbalance are identified, and nutritional supplementation. For surgical intervention, so there is no surgical intervention is required for postpartum depression. And for the nursing consideration, assesses for signs of postpartum depression at each postpartum visit and educate the mother on early symptoms. Encourage bonding with the baby through skin-to-skin contact and involvement in newborn care. Provide emotional support and active listening to help the mother express her feelings. Involve the family members in the care and educate them on how to support the mother. Monitor for signs of severe depression or suicidal ideation and initiate emergency intervention if necessary. Encourage rest and self-care to promote mental and physical well-being. Next, postpartum psychosis. So, postpartum psychosis is a rare but severe psychiatric disorder that occurs after childbirth, usually within the first 2 weeks postpartum. It is characterized by extreme mood disturbances, hallucinations, delusion, and disorganized thinking, making it a medical emergency that requires immediate intervention to protect both the mother and the baby. Etiology or the causative factors. So a rapid drop in estrogen and progesterone level after birth can trigger psychiatric symptoms. Sleep deprivation like severe sleep loss can contribute to altered mental states. Emotional distress related to childbirth, parenting responsibilities, or lack of support. A family history of postpartum psychosis or other psychiatric disorders increases susceptibility. And dysregulation of dopamine and serotonin in the brain may play a role. Signs and symptoms. First, hallucination, delusion, extreme mood swings, disorganized thinking, and incoherent speech,
paranoia and irrational fears, agitation, restlessness, or hyperactivity, sleep disturbances, difficulty bonding with the baby, or feeling detached from reality. Diagnostics. Psychiatric evaluation, Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale, Thyroid Function Test, and CBC and metabolic. For medical intervention, antipsychotic medication, mood stabilizer, sedatives or benzodiazepines for severe agitation and disturbances, electroconvulsive therapy for severe cases, and hospitalization in psychiatric unit to ensure safety and close monitoring. For surgical intervention, so there is no surgical intervention required for postpartum psychosis. And nursing intervention, ensure safety by monitoring for self-harm or harm to the baby by initiating emergency protocols if necessary. Provide a structured and calm environment to reduce stress and confusion. Administer prescribed medication and monitor for side effects. Educate the family on postpartum psychosis, emphasizing the need for emotional and practical support. Encourage supervised mother-infant bonding when the mother condition improves. Promote adequate rest and sleep by assisting with baby care when possible. Coordinate with a multidisciplinary team, including psychiatrists, obstetricians, and social workers for a comprehensive care plan. Next, postpartum blues. So, postpartum blues, known as baby blues, is a temporary and mild mood disturbance that occur in a new mother within the first few days after childbirth. It is characterized by mood swings, tearfulness, and irritability, but typically resolves within 2 weeks without medical intervention. Etiology and associated factors: a sudden drop of estrogen and progesterone level after delivery, physical exhaustion, frequent waking to care for the newborn disrupts sleep patterns, anxiety about motherhood, responsibility, and newborn care, and lack of support from family and friends or increased household responsibilities. Signs and symptoms: frequent crying or tearfulness without clear reason, mood swings and increased emotional sensitivity, irritability and restlessness, fatigue and sleep disturbances, feeling overwhelmed or anxious about motherhood, temporary loss of appetite, and malconcentration difficulties. For diagnostics, so there is no laboratory test needed. Clinical evaluation through a detailed discussion of symptoms with the healthcare provider. Edinburgh postnatal depression scale. And for the medical intervention, so supportive care including reassurance from medical providers and loved ones. And for surgical intervention, so there's no intervention necessary for the postpartum blues. And for nursing consideration, educate the mother about the postpartum blues and differentiate it from postpartum depression. Encourage rest and self-care, advising the mother to sleep when the baby sleeps. Promote emotional support involving family and friends and providing reassurance. Reassurance for the mother that postpartum blues are temporary and part of the normal adjustment to motherhood. Then monitor for worsening symptoms as persistent or severe mood disturbances may indicate postpartum depression. And lastly, encourage open communication about feelings and concerns with healthcare providers. And that's all.
Good day, everyone. And now let's talk about abortion. So, what is abortion? So, it is a termination of pregnancy before the fetus can survive outside the uterus. So, this can happen during the first or second trimester, before 20 weeks of gestation, and may be either spontaneous or induced. So, a spontaneous abortion occurs naturally without any external influence. So, the term miscarriage is commonly used instead as abortion, so may carry negative connotations for some women. So in contrast, an induced abortion is a deliberate termination of pregnancy, either by that woman or another person, and is also referred as elective abortion. So what is the etiology or causative factors of abortion or miscarriage? So abortion, whether spontaneous or induced, can be caused by multiple factors that affect maternal health, fetal development, or external conditions. So these factors can be classified into maternal, fetal, environmental, and medical factors. So first, we have maternal factors. So in maternal factors, we have hormonal imbalance, infection, chronic medical conditions, uterine abnormalities, and poor lifestyle choices. And we have also fetal factors, genetic abnormalities, and congenital malformations. For external factors, we have trauma or physical injury, radiation and environmental toxins, medications and herbal supplements, and also severe emotional stress. So, what are the symptoms and signs of abortion? Okay, we have vaginal bleeding. In vaginal bleeding, so the presence of blood coming from the vagina, so which may vary from light spotting to heavy bleeding with bloods. It is one of the earliest and most common signs of pregnancy loss. So we have also abdominal uterine cramping. So in abdominal uterine cramping, painful contractions or tightening in the lower abdomen, similar to menstrual cramps. And this occurs due to uterus attempting to expel the pregnancy tissue. And we have also low uptake. So the primary concern in an imminent miscarriage is ensuring that the uterus completely expels all fetal and placental tissue to prevent complications such as infection or infection. So the emotional and psychological impact of the patient is also a crucial consideration, as pregnancy loss can be deeply distressing experience. So what are the etiology or causative factors? We have chromosomal abnormalities, uterine abnormalities, maternal infections, trauma or injury, autoimmune disorders, and hormonal imbalances. For signs and symptoms, we have vaginal spotting or bleeding, uterine cramping, cervical dilation, and possible rupture of membranes. For diagnostics, we have ultrasound to assess fetal viability, serum HCG levels. So for diagnostics, we have ultrasound to assess fetal viability, serum is HCG levels, complete blood count or CBC to check for anemia or infection, and pelvic exam to assess cervical dilation. And we have also medical intervention. So we have pain management, like for analgesics, IV fluids if indicated, emotional support, and counseling. And for surgical intervention, we have dilation and curettage or D&C if necessary to remove the remaining tissue, and expectant management if complete expulsion is likely. And nursing consideration, we have monitor vital signs and bleeding, provide emotional support, educate the patient about future pregnancy planning and care, and monitor for signs of infection. And next, we have incomplete miscarriage. So it occurs when part of the pregnancy tissue is expelled, but some remain in the uterus. This type of miscarriage results in continued bleeding and cramping because the uterus is still attempting to expel the remaining tissue. So the body may eventually complete the miscarriage naturally, but in some cases, medical or surgical intervention is required to prevent complications such as infection or prolonged bleeding. So incomplete miscarriage is more likely to occur in late, later weeks of the first trimester and may be diagnosed through symptoms or imaging studies. So it is important to manage incomplete miscarriage carefully to reduce the risk of excessive blood loss and infection, ensuring that the uterus is completely empty to promote recovery. So for etiology and causative factors, we have chromosomal abnormalities, uterine or cervical abnormalities, maternal health conditions like diabetes, thyroid disorders, infections, and trauma. For signs and symptoms, we have vivid vaginal bleeding, severe cramping, cervical dilation, and retained tissue in the uterus. And for diagnostics, we have ultrasound to confirm retained products of conception, HCG levels up to monitor pregnancy status, and CBC to assess blood loss. And for medical intervention is to misoprostol to induce uterine contractions for expulsion, IV fluids for significant blood loss and pain management. And for surgical intervention, we have DNC if tissue is not expelled naturally, and suction curettage if needed. So what are the nursing considerations? We have monitor bleeding and signs of shock, provide emotional support, educate on symptoms of infection, and when to seek medical care and follow-up care for future pregnancy planning. Next, for third of types of abortion or miscarriage, we have complete miscarriage. So this is, of course, when all pregnancy tissue, including the fetus and placenta, has been expelled from the uterus, resulting in the resolution of pregnancy loss without the need for further medical or surgical intervention. So this typically happens within the first trimester, and the key distinguishing and wait lang. So this typically happens within the first trimester, and the key distinguishing feature is the uterus is entirely empty or imptied, leading to the decrease in symptoms such as cramping and bleeding. And while the process of a complete miscarriage can be physically less complicated than an incomplete one, it is still carries emotional and psychological effects that need to be addressed. So the body's hormonal levels begin to return to a pre-pregnancy state, and fertility may resume shortly after. So however, medical evaluation is often recommended to confirm that no retained tissue remains to prevent complications such as an infection and prolonged bleeding. So what are the etiology or causative factors? We have chromosomal abnormalities, maternal health conditions, trauma or stress, and uterine abnormalities. So for the signs and symptoms, we have vaginal bleeding, uterine cramping, cervical dilation followed by closure and expulsion of all fetal tissue. For diagnostics, we have ultrasound to confirm an empty uterus, CBC to check for anemia, HCG levels to confirm defining levels, and also for medical intervention, we have pain management observation for complete recovery and emotional support. And for surgical intervention, we have rarely needed unless retained tissue is suspected. And for nursing consideration, we have monitor for ongoing bleeding, provide emotional and psychological support, and educate about future pregnancy planning and encourage follow-up care. And lastly is the threatened miscarriage. So refers to a condition in early pregnancy where vaginal bleeding occurs and often accompanied by mild cramping, but the cervix remains closed and the fetus remains viable. So unlike the other types of miscarriage, it is threatened miscarriage that there is still a possibility of the pregnancy continuing if proper care is taken. So the cause is often unknown, but it may be related to hormonal imbalances, infection. The cause. So the cause is often unknown, but it may be related to hormonal imbalances, infections, or structural abnormalities in the uterus. So this condition can be stressful for the patient as there is uncertainty about the pregnancy outcome. So in many cases, with adequate rest and monitoring, so the pregnancy can continue to full term. So however, it is essential to manage the patient's symptoms and monitor for progression to an inevitable miscarriage. So what are the etiology or the causative factors? So we have chromosomal abnormalities, uterine abnormalities, hormonal imbalances, and infections and trauma. So for signs and symptoms, we have vaginal spotting or bleeding, mild cramping, closed cervix, and no fetal tissue expulsion. For diagnostics, we have ultrasound to check fetal heartbeat, HCG levels to assess pregnancy viability, and pelvic exam. And for medical interventions, we have bed rest if recommended, progesterone supplementation if indicated, and avoidance of strenuous activities. So for surgical intervention, we have not typically needed. So what are the nursing considerations? So we have educate about signs of worsening symptoms, provide emotional support, encourage hydration and proper nutrition and follow-up monitoring. Now we have also miscarriage. So it is of course when the fetus has died, but there are no immediate symptoms of pregnancy loss. So what are the etiology or causative factors? We have chromosomal abnormalities, maternal infections, and hormonal imbalances and autoimmune disorders. So for signs and symptoms, is vaginal spotting, mild cramping, no apparent loss of pregnancy and absence of fetal heartbeat. So for diagnostics, we have ultrasound to confirm lack of fetal heartbeat, HCG levels for declining or cluttered, and CBC to assess risk of infection or DIC. So what are the interventions? For medical intervention, expectant management or waiting for natural expulsion, medical induction with misoprostol, monitoring for signs of infection or complications. And for surgical intervention, we have D&C if natural expulsion does not occur. So what are the nursing considerations? First, we have monitor for signs of infection or DIC, provide emotional support, educate on future pregnancy planning, and encourage follow-up care. So for therapeutic nursing management in abortion and miscarriage, we have for abortion and or miscarriage includes obtaining a detailed health history and documenting the onset, duration, amount, and characteristics of vaginal bleeding. So continuous monitoring of vital signs is essential to assess the patient's condition. So if a miscarriage occurs in the first trimester, preparation for dilation and uh, curettage of our D and C and baby necessary. So providing emotional support and ensuring adequate rest are crucial for physical and psychological recovery. And patients should also be advised to refrain from sexual activity until bleeding has completely stopped to prevent infections and complications. And that's all for abortion or miscarriage.